talk about tariffs obscure, oblique, or obfuscated, well then, you are in the right place.
But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies.
Basically, a tariff is just a tax on an imported good. The importer of the good pays a fee to the government of the country imposing the tariff. The question is the company importing the good dumb enough to absorb the costs, or are the consumers in the country imposing the tariff needy enough to pay the price increase?
Today, Apple is announcing that it will invest $600 billion. That's with a B.
Some people think that this will cause more companies to produce more goods inside the country, imposing the tariff to avoid the tariff.
It is not going to create more jobs. It is not going to strengthen the U.S. manufacturing sector. Long term, we're talking tens of thousands of jobs lost in the U.S. equipment manufacturing industry.
Regardless of where the tariffs end up, the fact they're moving around so much is going to lower hiring. Whether the tariffs end up raising or lowering hiring once they're locked in, I think is unclear.
Tariffs will obviously help some people and industries. They will undoubtedly also hurt others, so the real question is, do they help or hurt more people? The best predictor of future events is similar historic events. It turns out the US has a history with tariffs almost as old as the US. So in an attempt to unkerfuffle Trump's tariffs, let's take a tour through those historic tariffs. This is our All About Tariffs special edition, and we'll get started with the first tariffs imposed in the US right after I give you 30 seconds to click the thumbs up. Roll the intro. George Washington was sworn into the office of the President of the United States on April 30th, 1789. 68 days later, on July 4th, 1789, he signed our first tariffs into law, imposing a 5% tariff on all imported goods. I told you our history with tariffs was almost as old as the country.
Yes, you did.
Yes, you did.
Yes, you did.
Alexander Hamilton argued that we had to artificially inflate the price of imports because other governments were already more socialist than he wanted the US to be and subsidized their producers. This allowed the producers to sell goods more cheaply than we could. Hamilton called this practice dumping. The real driving factor was a broke-ass government, so we started taxing shit, kind of like King George did.
Nuh-uh. Oh, no, he didn't.
And the problem turned out to be industrial globalization. The North made clothes, the South made cotton. The US tariffs English clothes. The North benefits by more competitive prices. The South is hurt by England's lower demand. So the question becomes, how do we balance the pain? I'm not sure what the answer to that question is, but I do know that one thing you do not do is piss off a very powerful country that you just kicked out. After the US Revolution, Europe kept right on fighting with itself. Various European powers were sinking US trade ships, like on purpose and stuff. France was ruthless in sinking ships, both going to and from England. France helped us in the Revolution, so President Jefferson embargoed English goods. Then President Hamilton created a complete no-trade policy against England.
You numbskull, you lame brain! How could you pull such a boneheaded stunt?
Then England was like, bloody hell, we'll burn down the White House. This was called the War of 1812. So the government doubled the 1789 tariffs. After the war, Hamilton was like, hey, English linen will hurt the new northern manufacturing plants. So Congress was like, well, let's help them out. They completely rewrote the tariff schedule, imposing a 25% tariff on imported linen. This was the Tariff Act of 1816. See, that example from the beginning does have a reason to be there. Also, we forgot to check things out on the world stage before doing this.
Some people are really fucking stupid.
Do you think the US traded with England during the War of 1812? Do you think England hadn't found the goods somewhere else? Do you think England maybe had huge wartime surpluses? So England sold their stuff to the US so cheap that even with the tariffs it undercut the price on US goods, which pissed off northern textile mills. England kept not buying US cotton, which pissed off southern cotton growers. This was a major contributing factor to the Panic of 1819 and the ensuing Depression. Other factors included non-centralized currency printing and land speculation.
This afternoon, I'm laying out my plan to ensure that the United States will be the crypto capital of the planet and the Bitcoin superpower of the world, and we'll get it done.
Immediately after the Depression ended, President Monroe messed with tariffs again. By 1828, the U.S. existed for 52 years, 2 sets of tariffs, 1 depression caused by those tariffs, and the 6th president decided to mess with tariffs again on his way out of office. To understand why this was a monumentally bad idea, you have to understand a little bit about the politics of the day. A nationwide depression started in 1820, and it was one of the first depressions on this scale the world had ever seen.
In the 1820s, people talked about the panic. In the 1820s, they were talking about what we now call the Panic of 1819. In the 19th century, the process of financial panics that lead to massive economy-wide depressions was a fairly new thing.
Slavery was divisive, slave and free states were constantly at odds, so the Missouri Compromise was signed into law.
In 1820, the Missouri Compromise Law was enacted by the United States Congress to settle the issue of slavery in the Western Territories. It stated that any state north of the 36th 30 parallel would be a free state, while any state south of it could allow slavery.
Around this time, securities speculators started doing the same thing with slaves they did with mortgages in the early 2000s. We'll get to that in the Great Depression and killing tariffs. For now, slaves as securities.
We see the bonds that are issued by the southern states, by the southern state banks, which essentially securitize enslaved human beings and sell them as commodities on the financial markets of the world.
Remember, slave states make cotton and free states make textiles. So actually everyone was dependent on the slave economy. Some people were just more honest about it than others.
Remember, it's better to tell the truth.
And that's no lie. Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
Alright, now the Tariff of 1828.
Increased the rates on imports into the United States to as much as 50%, and the country split in a way that would later be echoed by the division between the Union and the Confederacy in the Civil War. Southerners nicknamed it the Tariff of Abominations. The tariff forced Southerners to buy manufactured goods from businesses in the North at high prices. Britain was importing less cotton because their profits from exports had dropped.
The South just took a DP right in the A. As the video mentioned, prices rose significantly. Remember, black slaves are a global fiduciary commodity. Less demand for cotton means less need for production, means less demand for blacks, means a reduction in commodity holdings. Southern and northern economies are intertwined, so disrupting the southern economy also disrupts the northern economy. This led to Andrew Jackson winning the presidency in 1828. Andrew Jackson was a whole bag of bad president. The man was literally directly involved in every horrible thing that happened at the time. But at least he wasn't an entire truckload of bad president.
My fellow Americans, it is my honor to introduce the 45th and soon-to-be 47th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Jackson's platform portrayed him as a common man who hated banks and tariff backers. He lowered some of the 1828 tariffs with the 1832 tariff bill, but kept them exorbitant on King Cotton-related items. South Carolina, which just happens to be Jackson's home state, declared the tariffs null and void, refusing to pay or charge them. Andy Boy passed the Force Act, allowing him to use the military against his home state of South Carolina.
President Donald Trump is sending hundreds of Marines to Los Angeles as protests continue.
Jackson refused to recharter the Second Bank of the U.S. on July 10, 1832. Jackson moved deposits from the U.S. Bank to select state banks, resulting in credit destabilization and a speculative credit balloon. Jackson declared land could only be purchased with specie to curb land speculation. Instead, it caused a specie run on the banks. This resulted in the government moving away from high tariffs with the Compromise Tariff Act of 1833, and it would only take 9 years for the tariffs to fall to their pre-inflation rates. While all that was going on, global cotton prices tanked because of a depression in England caused by our tariffs on cotton. And that is how the tariffs of 1828 and 1832 led directly to the Panic of 1837.
Oh, no. Not again.
That's kind of put a pin in tariffs for about 30 years, but then the South was like, hey, we don't want to be Americans anymore. In 1861, not only did the South secede, but we raised some heavy import duties. The Morrill Tariffs stopped taxing by price in favor of taxing by product. It got tabled by the Senate in 1859. Then the South seceded. So, with the opposition gone, it passed in 1861. Buchanan signed Morrill into law on March 2nd. Lincoln took office on March 4th. The tariffs took effect April 1st. On April 12th, people started fighting at Fort Sumter because some people thought that owning other people was a good idea, not because of tariffs. But the war is important to tariffs because the U.S. does not collect tariffs in foreign countries like the Confederacy.
Very interesting, but not too nostalgic.
The South said goodbye, the North said nope. War becomes an economic boon with 20th century war machines. For now, it's a drain. The U.S. raised tariffs to 19% and collected the first income tax. In 1862, tariffs hit 36% and included more goods. In 1864, tariffs jumped to 48%. Northern manufacturers fleeced the public. Farmers paid 48% more for raw materials. The Civil War ended, Lincoln got shot, and we're going to fast forward to the Gilded Age. You know, the era that gave us robber barons and abject poverty with very little in the middle. The income tax was repealed in 1781. Railroads were exempted from most tariffs and pricing oversight. Railroads price gouged small producers and one-rail towns. Conservatives and progressives fought over the efficacy of tariffs. Tariffs steadily declined after the Civil War.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
Which brings us to the Great Tariff Debate of 1888. The government had more money than it needed, which is the opposite of a deficit, FYI. Progressives said, reduce tariffs, let's take in more money. Conservatives said, oh no, raise tariffs to discourage foreign goods from the market. Do you want to know who won? How bad? Bad enough to click the thumbs up? In 1890, McKinley's Tariff Act narrowly passed, raising tariffs back up to almost 50%. Additionally, President Harrison would not sign until the provision allowed him unilateral control over rates. This was called Harrison's Terrible Tariff by the South.
Well, the McKinley Tariffs of 1890 were brought in by, like I said, William McKinley, who at the time was in Congress, and they were about 49.5%. He was what was known as the Napoleon of protectionism. There was another a little bit of, reason for them, and that was to push the annexation of Canada.
What did McKinley's 50% tariffs do for the American economy?
It didn't do anything great. It actually really hurt the economy. It especially hurt farmers.
These tariffs caused the stock market to tank right before midterms, which caused the conservatives to lose a lot of seats and allowed the populist party to become a viable third-party option for a time. At least the populists back then had enough manners not to co-opt an existing political party. Progressive Grover Cleveland won the 1892 presidential election just in time for the Panic of 1893. The 1893 panic was 5 months that changed the country. Banks failed. Without FDIC protection, depositors were out of luck. Railroads failed and took their creditors down with them. This still depressed market completely crashed and a national depression ensued. The Wilson-Gorman Tariff was supposed to lower tariffs. The House added an income tax on the top 5%. The Senate gutted the tariff-lowering mechanisms, and so in 1893 we got tariffs and income tax. In 1897, the McKinley Tariff raised rates again. The Panic of 1907 raised the tariff debate again. So the Payne-Aldrich Tariff passed in 1909. Tariffs were raised and corporate financials got oversight from Big Brother. Progressives were once again pushing back against tariffs. The Wilson-Gorman income tax had been ruled unconstitutional, at least until the 16th Amendment fixed that. October saw the Underwood Tariff Act reduce tariffs to 27% and create an income tax similar to modern income tax, but only affecting the top 2% of the population. Because tariffs are so horrible that we literally created the IRS as a better idea. Then we got distracted by World War I, and the Roaring Twenties happened, and tariffs were pretty much a settled issue until 1929. A decade of speculation, debt for stocks, ballooning the entire market. What could go wrong? Between October 24th and 29th of 1929, the market lost over 75 points, kicking off the Great Depression.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
With the entire world in a depression, the U.S. decided it was a good time to raise tariffs.
U.S. President Herbert Hoover signing into law the Smoot Hawley Tariff Act. The legislation increased tariffs on roughly 40% of the goods coming into the U.S. as much as to 59%. There was an almost unanimous plea by economists at the time not to pass the Smoot Hawley Act. Even the U.S. Senate, on its official website today, calls Smoot Hawley among the most catastrophic acts in congressional history. That's a quote.
This worsened the Depression. Unemployment soared. Hoover lost to Roosevelt. FDR introduced the New Deal and immediately began to lower unemployment. FDR relied heavily on social services, government projects, and free trade. Trump is the anti-Roosevelt. In 1934, the president got unilateral control over reciprocal tariffs, and most favored nations were created.
When a country grants most favored nation status to another, it agrees to extend the same trade terms to that country as it does to its other trading partners. This principle is not just about goods. It also applies to services, ensuring that foreign service providers have the same opportunities as local ones. It prevents countries from favoring certain trading partners, which can lead to trade disputes and protectionism.
Economic conditions improved slowly until 1938. This is war. Hitler and World War II ended the Great Depression with a bang. See, 20th century war machines equals economic boom. The Americas were about the only populated continents not turned into battlefields. Well, unless you were Japanese in the US. Blaming the war on the Depression, 34 countries signed the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade in 1947.
Now, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, was established in 1947. So the GATT sought to lower tariffs on goods. The second provision is the most favored nation principle, which states that any favorable trade terms offered to one country have to be extended to all member countries. The next provision is what we call dispute settlement.
And thus was started the free trade era. I have an upcoming deep dive on the 1950s, so we're going to go ahead and skip that decade for now. In 1964 through 1967, over 60 countries participated in the Kennedy GATT rounds.
The main purpose of this round was to pin down some agreements between Europe and the US. The Bridge Club had the most say in policy changes and tariff cuts. The Kennedy round pays attention to agricultural products as well. The lesser developed countries were not in favor of the idea of free trade. The United States offered to treat agricultural products the same as industrial ones.
Shipping got cheap as shit in the 1970s.
And containerization makes the cost of shipping much cheaper and a lot easier because you can quickly move from one form of transport to another. And that's allowed globalization to really happen.
Reagan got elected and fucked a bunch of shit up, including trade relations with the Japanese.
Prime Minister Nakasone of Japan will be visiting me here at the White House next week.
Last week, I placed new duties on some Japanese products in response to Japan's inability to enforce their trade agreement. Imposing such tariffs or trade barriers and restrictions of any kind are steps that I am loath to take. Over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. The way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition.
In 1989, Bush Sr. replaced Reagan. Before leaving office, he signed NAFTA. Clinton ratified it. Clinton gets all the credit because politics is awesome at giving credit to whoever is in office when shit happens.
It includes Canada, the US, and Mexico. It was extremely controversial. Critics feared massive job losses. Supporters, though, they claimed that it would lead to cheaper goods, and that would lead to economic growth. Before NAFTA, when items were imported, they were taxed. After NAFTA, they weren't. Higher tariffs, more expensive goods, less trade. Free trade agreements like NAFTA remove those tariffs, incentivizing trade and lowering costs for consumers.
Next year, we got the World Trade Organization, or WTO.
Regulates international trade since January 1st, 1995. Rules can be created or altered through a majority vote, but in most cases, such decisions are reached unanimously. Whenever disputes arise, the WTO tries to resolve them through negotiations. The organization can even impose sanctions on countries which break the rules.
The internet went public, the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, China joined WTO in 2001 and flooded the US with cheap goods. 2.4 million US jobs were lost. The Rust Belt was created, unemployment soared, the opioid crisis started, and populists got pissed at globalization. 9/11 happened, the market sucked, interest rates decreased, credit got easy, and a housing boom started. Mortgages were rolled into securities and kept getting riskier. In 2008, a shit ton of mortgages defaulted, homelessness soared, and the government bailed out the bankers that created the problem in the first place, kind of like what the Missouri Compromise did with blacks. All this shit got blamed on globalization by the burgeoning populist movement. I talk about that at length and how did we get here, so we'll skip the political part in this video.
Oh, thank God.
Obama got elected in 2008. It pissed a lot of people off. Trump toyed with a run in 2012, but Bin Laden was killed in 2011. Trump did not run. Trump ran in 2016 and got elected. Which brings us to the end of the free trade era and the start of modern tariffs. In 2018, NAFTA was getting a little long in the tooth. Remember, we didn't even have the public internet when NAFTA was created, so there were entire sectors of the market that were not governed by this bill. So Trump ripped it up and started over. In the end, we got the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, which is basically just an updated version of NAFTA. And Trump was like,
"You will respect my authority!"
Trump 1.0 also put a 10% tariff on steel and aluminum. This permanently raised the US prices on both goods above the world price. There was a huge spike in US steel prices. US production of both goods rose, but the higher prices still negatively impacted downstream markets. Ramping up US industry took time and money, leading to Trump's removal of the tariffs on Mexico and Canada. Biden eventually removed the tariffs on EU countries as well. If anyone who remembered the Gilded Age were still alive at this point, they probably would have gotten deja vu.
If you stop and think, there's almost always a better way. Now I know! And knowing is half the battle.
This worked out so well that Trump 1.0 attempted to do the same thing with China to address our trade deficit with them.
It looks like President Trump is gearing up for a trade war.
Make America wealthy again.
A number of other groups that usually have Trump's back are speaking out against it. And now, lawmakers from his own party are begging him not to do it. Wall Street wasn't too happy about the plan either. When Trump announced the tariffs for the first time on March 1st, the Dow closed more than 400 points lower.
Ultimately, the tariffs did not help the trade deficit, but they did hurt US farmers who required a bailout. So basically, a Smoot Hawley-like tariff had a Smoot Hawley-like effect.
Thanks for telling me.
Trump 2.0 has been threatening all kinds of tariffs all year. We've seen a scary pattern emerge. Trump announces tariffs or tariff increases and the market falls sharply. Trump announces a pause, trade deal, or repeal, and the market recovers some, but not completely. The overall impact has driven the market down significantly. Every time the market goes up, Trump supporters are like, winning! They fail to realize that we are actually all losing. With tariffs changing every day and being postponed and or canceled last minute, businesses can't even operate effectively in the US right now because they can't make any kind of fiduciary plans. Let's wrap this shit show up, shall we? We just went through about 250 years of tariff history in almost a half an hour, and I hope you don't have whiplash. Honestly, I could pick any one of the tariff topics in this video and make a complete video on just that, but tariffs are boring and I don't want to. Additionally, tariffs don't operate on the market in isolation from the larger political climate of the day, so they are only one contributing factor. On the other hand, every single time high tariffs are raised, the market is destabilized, leading one to the inevitable conclusion that high tariffs destabilize the economy. Those other factors tend to influence how drastic the destabilization is and how much pain comes as a result of it. Basically, high tariffs are always designed to make U.S. goods more competitive on the U.S. market, thereby extracting some amount of foreign goods from the U.S. market. If you go to the doctor because you have a skin lesion, and he cuts the skin lesion out, it heals, but you're left with a scar that never goes away, and tariffs have the same effect on the market. That is why Trump's tariffs will not have the desired long-term effect, and quite frankly, will be lucky not to end up in a depression similar to the Great Depression. What do you think about all this? Let me know in a comment. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell, and I'll see you next time there is an impossible knot on time. Oh, by the way, we made it through the whole video without mentioning the Epstein files.
Release the list.
And the problem turned out to be industrialism. Remember, free states may close. The income tax was repealed in 1780. Hitler in World War II ended the Great Depression with a bang. See, 20th century war machines